To formally call the meeting to order, may we now welcome on stage MBC Deputy Executive Director and Officer in Charge for the Executive Director, Michelle D.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the special session of our Foreign Leader Series. Our event today will feature Canada's economic ministers, the Honourable Maninder Sidhu, Minister of International Trade, the Honourable Rechie Valdez, Minister for Women and Gender Equality, and Secretary of State, Small Business and Tourism. We're also pleased to welcome His Excellency David Hartman, the Ambassador of Canada to the Philippines. I think Her Excellency Julia Fediv will be joining us shortly also. She is the Ambassador of Ukraine to the Philippines. And we're also pleased to be joined by the MBC Trustees Cosette Canilao, Peter Maquera, and Riza Mantaring, who will also moderate our discussion this afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. MBC's Foreign Leaders Series features ambassadors and foreign dignitaries who offer valuable perspectives on key areas such as trade, investment, social and geopolitical developments, and emerging challenges. Last year, we're proud to host Ambassador Hartman as one of our keynote speakers. He is a close friend of MBC and its Board of Trustees. And we're grateful and proud to be partnered with the Embassy of Canada for this event. To provide a brief overview of today's program, Ambassador Hartman will open with welcome remarks. He will be followed by 5-minute keynotes from Minister Sidhu and Minister Valdez. After, both ministers will then join MBC Trustee Riza Mantaring for a fireside chat, which will include a brief Q&A session with the audience. Before I turn over to Ambassador Hartman for the welcome message, I would like to invite everyone for a quick group photo opportunity. Please remain seated. Our photographer will come to the stage. One, two, three, smile. On this side. Thank you, everyone. To deliver the welcome remarks, please welcome on stage the Ambassador of Canada to the Philippines, His Excellency David Hartman.
Magandang hapon po, good afternoon, bon après-midi, everyone. To the distinguished members of the Board of Trustees and all members of the Makati Business Club, to Mr. Wayne Farmer, President of the Canada-ASEAN Business Council, honorable members Sidhu and Valdez, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is once again my sincere pleasure to be back with the Makati Business Club. Since I last stood before you in October of last year, I am very happy to report that the Canada-Philippines commercial relationship has continued to gain tremendous momentum. To the Embassy Board of Trustees and the entire Embassy team, thank you once again for your hosting today's session on the occasion of the visit of Canada's Minister of International Trade, the Honourable Maninder Sidhu, and the Honourable Minister of Women and Gender Equality, and the Secretary of State for Small Business and Tourism, Rechie Valdez. Friends, let me be clear. Canada deeply values and greatly appreciates our partnership with the MBC. We are especially grateful for the efforts to provide an essential platform for serious, forward-looking dialogue between the Canadian and Philippine business communities, a role given the strong growth trajectory in our commercial relationship that is now more important than ever. To the members of the MBC, colleagues from the private sector, business partner organizations in the diplomatic corps, it's a pleasure to see so many familiar faces joining with us here today. I will be brief because you are here, after all, to hear from those directly engaged in shaping the economic landscape that we are finding ourselves living in. And there can be no doubt that these are indeed most interesting times. As you will know all too well, we are in the midst of a period of profound realignment in the global economy. Long-standing assumptions about how countries trade, invest, and align with one another are being revisited. In this environment, economic relationships are no longer simply transactional. They carry strategic weight that they didn't carry to the same degree just a few short years ago. In that context, the choices we make about where and with whom we trade, invest, and build will define economic outcomes for our countries for the next generation. And Canada and the Philippines, I am happy to emphasize, are making those choices deliberately and increasingly together. The pace of our commercial engagement over the past year reflects this intent. The launch of bilateral Canada-Philippines free trade negotiations, robust progress towards the conclusion of the Canada-ASEAN Free Trade Agreement, growing cooperation in areas such as critical minerals, nuclear energy, and broader economic development across a multitude of key industry sectors, the introduction of more direct flights between Vancouver and Manila, and importantly, a more focused and mature dialogue between our governments and respective private sectors. And today, this dialogue continues at a most pivotal level. The choices being made now in negotiating rooms in Manila and Ottawa will shape Canadian and Filipino businesses, again, as I mentioned a few moments ago, for the next generation. The members of this club, the entrepreneurs and the small business leaders here today, the communities whose livelihoods depend on trading relationship that delivers, all stand to benefit from those choices that are made by our colleagues today and by the informed people closest to them. Simply stated, the candor and depth of engagement in this room matters, and the significance of this simply cannot be overstated. The most consequential elements of our future economic relationship are being shaped now. What is written into our free trade agreement will directly affect the opportunities available to Canadian and Filipino businesses alike, including members of the Makati Business Club, entrepreneurs and small business leaders, and the communities that depend on a trading relationship that delivers real results. The insight and candor you bring to today's discussion will help shape our future partnership. So before I turn to our ministers, let me simply say this. Our leaders take business seriously, they take our partnership seriously, and they have come here today not only to speak, but perhaps equally as important, to listen. So thank you very much. Merci beaucoup et maraming salamat po. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the stage Canada's Minister of International Trade, the Honourable Maninder Sidhu.
Thank you, Ambassador Hartman, for those remarks, and of course, thank you, Michelle, for the warm welcome here. Good afternoon, bonjour à tous, for everyone. Thank you to everyone at the Makati Business Club, and of course, for Minister Valdez for joining me here on this very important trip. We've had a very productive day, and I want to talk to you about what we accomplished today, but I first want to acknowledge that the world that we're operating in, it feels unsettled, geopolitics are volatile, supply chains are strained. In moments like this, countries around the world are looking for a trusted partner, a stable partner, and a reliable partner, and Canada is that partner. And with the Philippines, our bonds are only getting closer. The numbers tell the tale. Last year, our bilateral merchandise trade totaled $3.4 billion, up by 7% from the year before. Our two-way trade and services reached $3.2 billion, up by 20%, and Canadian investments in the Philippines amounted to $1.7 billion, a growth of 44%. That's not a modest uptick. This is a region on the move, and Canada is moving with it. This kind of growth doesn't just happen by accident. This is what rules-based trade and trusted partnership delivers, and today we made that partnership even stronger. Earlier today, we announced that Canada has accepted an invitation to join the Lausanne Economic Corridor Partnership. As part of that membership, I announced an initial $2 million contribution in technical assistance for a corridor project to be determined. Canada's membership is a commitment to mutual economic growth to supporting the Philippines in their long-term development. Now, let me talk about what building together the long-term looks like, because it's important that we continue to work together as we grow our economies and, of course, our industries. It's important that we grow on agriculture, energy, and, of course, critical minerals, but also what the Canada-ASEAN Free Trade Agreement would look like. This deal would give Canadian businesses and workers access to nearly 700 million consumers and a $5 trillion market. Prime Minister Carney has said this deal could add more than $1.5 billion to Canada's economy and open opportunities for growth across ASEAN economies. Negotiations have now passed the halfway mark. Multiple chapters have already been concluded. And at the most recent negotiating meeting in Jakarta just weeks ago, all parties reaffirmed their commitment to substantially complete this agreement and conclude by the end of the year. As the Philippines chairs ASEAN this year, you are at the center of that effort, and Canada is committed to getting this done. The Canada-Philippines Free Trade Agreement This would be the Philippines' first free trade agreement with a North American country. And we are moving fast. 2 rounds of negotiations completed, a 3rd round scheduled for Ottawa in July. We are on track to include this agreement this year. That is exactly the pace we want to go at. A free trade agreement with Canada means better, more predictable market access for Philippine exporters. It means Canadian capital and expertise flowing into priority sectors here in the Philippines, including mining and the minerals processing, digital infrastructure, and advanced manufacturing sectors. And it means the Philippines gaining a foothold into Canadian supply chains and through Canada into markets in the Western Hemisphere. As your trade officials have noted, Canada would benefit from the Philippines' position as a strategic gateway into ASEAN and the broader region. This is a partnership built on complementarity. What you have, Canada can benefit, and what we have, Philippines can benefit. This is about mutual prosperity. And as I discussed with Secretary Roque and Secretary Go earlier today, together we can do so much more. All of this is trade diversification in action. Canada's goal of doubling our non-US exports over the next decade is not ambitious for its own sake. It's about building new markets, new contracts, and of course, new jobs, not just for Canadians, but for our partners on both sides of the Pacific. As Prime Minister Carney has said, middle powers have the most to lose from a world of fortresses and the most to gain from a world of cooperation. Like the Philippines, Canada is a middle power and a trading nation, a country with the resources and skills the world needs and the values to back them up. We have the capital, the talent, and the fiscal capacity to act boldly. Food security, energy security, clean growth, infrastructure, resilient supply chains, and we bring to those partnerships what Canada does best. Secure supply of energy, including oil, LNG, and nuclear, world-class education, cutting-edge research, sustainable agriculture and fisheries, natural resources, including expertise in sustainable mining, green infrastructure, aerospace, and defense. These are challenging times, but Canada is not stepping back from the world. In fact, we are leaning in, and the Philippines is central to that strategy, because when Canada and the Philippines work together, both of our economies win. We gain strength by standing together, so let's keep building together. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Minister Sidhu. At this point, let us all welcome on stage the Honourable Rechie Valdez, Minister for Women and Gender Equality and Secretary of State, Small Business and Tourism.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Before I kind of get into my speech, I just want to add on a few points to what Minister Maninder Sidhu said. Just in terms of ambition, within a year of coming into government, thanks to the leadership of Prime Minister Mark Carney, we have secured 20 economic partnerships with 4 countries, and more recently, it became law that we enacted a trade agreement with both the United Kingdom and as well as Indonesia. That is the type of ambition that we have as Canada, and we're here to say, we're open for business, and we're here to work with you here in the Philippines to be able to continue to secure that free trade agreement along with the ASEAN trade agreement as well. Nagalaklak akong makasama kayong lahat. Ako po si Rechie Valdez. Again, you've heard the Canadian Minister responsible for women, gender equality, small business, and tourism. It's so good to be back here in Manila. I was telling others as I was coming here, it's so good to be back home. It's been a while. So I want to thank Ambassador for your leadership and everything you've done. I've been here back with you in Manila in my last visit. Happy to be here to continue to work with you again. And I want to thank the Makati Business Club for bringing us together today. And it's a pleasure to be here with so many business leaders. You are the ones that have created jobs. You are the ones that have shaped industries and have helped drive one of Southeast Asia's most dynamic economies. This is my second visit to the Philippines as minister, but this is also very personal to me, and it goes way beyond my ministerial portfolio. My parents were born in Bataan and Batangas, And like so many Filipinos of their generation, they made the brave choice to build a new life abroad. They immigrated first to Kitwe, Zambia, Africa, where my brother and I were born, before eventually making their way to Canada. They did not arrive with much. They arrived with courage, with faith, and with hope. And that deep Filipino belief of hard work, community that helped carried us through. Our Filipino Bayanihan spirit is something that I carry forward in the work that I do each and every day. And I am certainly not alone in carrying it. Today in Canada, nearly 1 million Canadians trace their roots back to the Philippines. They are doctors, engineers, teachers, entrepreneurs, and community leaders. They have woven themselves into the fabric of Canadian life. And in doing so, they have built the foundation of our bilateral relationship. This is the foundation that gives me and Maninder Sidhu so much confidence about where this relationship is headed. Minister Sidhu has already spoken about the architecture of our trade partnership. What I want to talk about is what enables and infuels it. Because trade, at its most powerful, is not just the movement of goods across borders, although that's what it is, but it's also the relationships that are beneath and underneath those goods. It's the trust that makes that deal possible, that shared understanding of how each country does business. The Filipino-Canadian community has been building that trust for decades on both sides of the Pacific, and it gives our two countries a head start that most bilateral relationships would envy. That connection shows up in real and practical ways. Ambassador already mentioned that the new direct Air Canada service between Vancouver and Manila launched that last year is just one signal of that relationship. It makes it easier for families to visit both businesses, to send teams, and for ideas to travel in both directions. And as I've been speaking to colleagues here, many of you have family back in Canada. Many of you have relationships and stories like your best friend I heard earlier today. These are the kinds of connections that compound over time. And as Minister responsible for small businesses, one of my priorities is really to deepen this relationship to ensure that small and medium-sized enterprises are at the center of it. Canadian micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises are among the most innovative in the world, particularly in clean tech, agriculture, agri-foods, and digital services. And in meeting with Secretary of Trade and Industry, Cristina Roque, just earlier, it is clear that Filipino micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises are eager for those partnerships. Just like Canadian businesses are hungry, it sounds like you're all hungry for that too. When Canadian micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises find each other, the results are remarkable. Let me give you an example. So just this past February, our government funded a women-led trade mission to the Philippines. When I met these women entrepreneurs, let me tell you, they were so excited to tell me the good stories. One of the trade mission participants was Manny Mancini, CEO of TradeWorks Environmental, a Canadian clean tech startup. She came here looking for the right partner, and she found one. TradeWorks has since signed a distribution agreement with Power for All here in the Philippines, bringing Canadian biological water and wastewater treatment technology to communities across the country. That is a Canadian entrepreneur, a Filipino company, and a real environmental challenge that were solved together. That is exactly the kind of partnership we want to see way more of. And it is no coincidence that the entrepreneur behind it is a woman. Because when you look at what is driving growth both in our countries, women are at the heart of it. In the Philippines, I envy this. It's truly remarkable. Roughly 2/3 of micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises are women-owned. In Canada, entrepreneurs are among the fastest growing segment of our economy. That is an enormous amount of economic potential looking for them to grow. In Canada, that potential right now for women entrepreneurs is 150 billion in our GDP. So part of my job as Canada's Minister of Women and Gender Equality is to make sure that we are creating opportunities for them. Whether it's trade agreements, whether women are fully participating and benefiting as well, and who does that impact? The ripple effect is really our families and our communities. So I'll close with this. I'm standing here as Canada's first Filipina Canadian Federal Cabinet Minister, and every time I represent Canada abroad, I carry our community very proudly with me. And when I come here back home to the Philippines, I am reminded exactly why this partnership matters and why I will always keep fighting for it. Maraming salamat, and I look forward to our conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Minister Valdez. Can I invite you to please take one of the lounge chairs in front? I would also like to invite back on stage Minister Sidhu and MBC Trustee Riza Mantaring for the fireside chat.
Good afternoon, everyone. We have allotted half an hour for the fireside chat, and I just have to warn you in advance that our ministers have a hard stop, so I'm sorry if I'll have to cut some of you off later. We have prepared a wide range of topics for today's discussion. Our evolving economic relations are part of it, evolving economic relations to Canada's trade diversification strategy and the ASEAN, Canada, and Philippines-Canada FTA negotiations, strategic collaboration in the Luzon Economic Corridor, agriculture, women's entrepreneurship, and so on, as well as tourism and people ties that form the bedrock of our bilateral relationship. So I'll begin by asking with a few questions, my own followed by some questions from the audience. So to both ministers, we noted that Canada's trade policy is anchored on 3 pillars, which you both alluded to: a strong, rules-based multilateral trading system, trade diversification, and inclusive trade. Both of you have been pushing trade diversification hard. From the perspective of MBC members, what does Canada's diversification strategy actually mean for the businesses in this room?
Well, thank you for that question, Riza. I think, the Makati business group is important to that. You have 700 plus members that utilize free trade agreements. I know the Philippines and ASEAN have multiple trade agreements signed with the likes of Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and others. And so to me, having spent 13 years in the private sector facilitating international trade, trade should work for small businesses. It should work for those that are looking to expand into new regions around the world. And so that's part of the negotiations right now. What can we do to ensure that Canadian businesses have access, but also Filipino businesses have access to the Canadian market? And so what I look at is in terms of sectors, nuclear, clean technology, agriculture, seafood, and so many others. And so when you look at free trade agreements, they should work for businesses on the ground. So when we set policies in Ottawa, it's about unlocking opportunities, new market opportunities around the world. And so the Prime Minister has given me an ambitious target of increasing non-U.S. trade by the tune of $300 billion by 2035. And so we're on the right track. We're picking up momentum. In the first 10 months last year alone, we increased non-U.S. trade by $33 billion. And so the markets that we've identified for key growth potential is in the Indo-Pacific, is markets like the Philippines, where we're serious about doing more business. And so that's why 6 months ago, when I was with the Prime Minister in Malaysia at the ASEAN conference, where we met President Marcos, that's where we announced the intent to negotiate the Canada-Philippine agreement to get that done this year, because we know that many businesses will benefit on both sides of the Pacific from a free trade agreement.
Yeah, what I'd like to add to that is essentially the opportunity, right? So when I met with Secretary Roque the last time I visited, we had the opportunity of meeting directly with entrepreneurs as well. So I'll give you 2 examples. We had an app developer to help with mental health. And second, I also met with a SME here in the Philippines who was trying to release her technology of allowing care workers more assistance online. So we have 2 entrepreneurs. These are Philippine entrepreneurs. They came to Canada for one of our collision conferences, and in that conference, they were able to secure significant investments for the business to grow and adapt. Like, it is truly this diversification strategy. You've already heard all the good news that it'll bring, but what it does for a business here in the Philippines is it means encouraging more partnerships and more investments. And for micro businesses, it's a huge opportunity. And then more so if you're a medium-sized business, et cetera. So it's really about opportunity, seizing it, and really from a inclusive perspective, I think having inclusion in our policies is truly important because it gives all entrepreneurs the ability to have access to equal opportunity across the board.
I'll ask you a bit more about that inclusion later on. So you mentioned the free trade agreement. For the members here of the audience, Canada has bilateral and regional FTAs in force with 51 countries. I think among the largest and only the only G7 nation that actually has FTAs with all the 6 other nations. So they're really at the center of trading with, I think, 2/3 of the GDP of the world you're involved in. So our FTA negotiations are moving very fast, okay? Hopefully. And the ASEAN-Canada FTA shares the same target of being finished this year. So aside from the priority areas you mentioned, agriculture, energy, what else should MBC members focus their attention on getting ready for that?
No, I think when I look at the lunch we just had with Secretary Go and Secretary Roque, we talked about the Lausanne Economic Corridor Partnership, where Canada just announced our intention of a $2 million announcement to participate in that corridor. When you look at that corridor project, what does it represent? It represents data centers. It represents energy opportunities. It represents opportunities around supply chains, logistics, and so that's where Canada can excel. And so, for your members, I would look at what we're doing in that region. Our contribution signals to our business community in Canada that Canada is willing and ready to participate alongside the United States, alongside Japan and other partners that have put their foot forward. And so I think when you look at that, when you look at our nuclear capabilities, we have can-do technology. We have stable supply of uranium that can supply the Philippines here. But we also have the skill set to build data centers. Atkins Real is a big Canadian company. You see our pension funds are investing in these companies. But also what the Philippines wants to do and President Marcos wants to do is attract incoming investments. And so that's what we're doing in Canada. And so there's possibilities to partner up there. Last year alone, we attracted close to $97 billion in foreign direct investment. So part of my responsibilities, in addition to Minister of International Trade, is investment attraction. And so that was the highest investment attraction in 18 years. Why is that? It's because Canada has the potential to do so much more with the Indo-Pacific. As the Indo-Pacific grows, there's a need for food security. There's a need for energy. There's a need for critical minerals. We have all of that. And so when you're looking at and you're talking about uncertainty around trade, rules-based trade, Canada stands out as a leader. And so this is why you're seeing more and more businesses want to do more with Canada. And I think part of that is maybe what Makati Business Partnership can do with maybe the Filipino Canadian Chamber of Commerce is to have those B2B relationship building exercises to see where can we find complementaries between our two economies, because that's the way to get businesses in the room and to really get the SMEs part of the conversation. Because as you know, the big guys will always find their way around, but you need to really focus with the SMEs to give them that B2B matchmaking. And so that's what Trade Commissioner Services does. So whenever I take an outbound trade delegation, we make sure that the country I'm going to partners up, so we're doing better B2B matchmaking. And so I invited Secretary Roque to come to Canada with the delegation, so we can set up the same type of meetings so businesses from both sides of the Pacific can benefit.
I'll just touch on a few other industries. So thanks to Minister Sidhu's leadership with regards to our Indo-Pacific strategy, Manila was chosen to have our Indo-Pacific Agriculture and Agri-Foods Office. In Canada, our agriculture sector is extremely strong. If you look at the opportunities we have, we're the highest standards for food inspection. So we have a lot of best practices that we can share here. We know that food insecurity is just equally as challenging here in the Philippines, but in Canada, we have the leadership, we have the technology to be able to help businesses scale, but most importantly, something that's important here in the Philippines is sustainability. How do you integrate solutions into how your best practices within agriculture so that you can have that long-term stability, so you don't have to heavily rely on importing food from everywhere else. That's one industry. Second, artificial intelligence. Minister Evan Solomon is leading the way. Certainly some things that we can share there. But there's a lot of opportunities for us to share across the board. And you might have seen from a defense perspective, Canada is already significantly helping the Philippines when it comes to defense. We're significantly investing in that regard. And we're going to, I think partnering with the Philippines is a huge opportunity also from a national defense perspective.
Thank you. I guess to Minister Valdez, just want to ask a question because there are many remarkable women leaders in this room. You've met some of them earlier. Canada's focus on inclusive trade, plus particular emphasis on maximizing benefits for traditionally underrepresented groups such as small and medium-sized enterprises, women, and indigenous people. By the way, in the recent trade delegation, which Minister Valdez mentioned earlier, which was led by the Chief Trade Commissioner, Sarah Wilshaw, there were really, really remarkable women in the room. And that was such a, I think, a very enriching visit, rich conversation. So we missed you there, but we listened to your video message with a lot of pride as the first Filipino-Canadian in the cabinet. You have made women's economic empowerment a cornerstone of your work. How are you advancing that? And what role do you see women entrepreneurs playing in deepening the Canada-Philippines trade relationship, especially as the FTA is likely coming soon? And I believe in your trade agreements, you actually put in provisions to make it inclusive.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just met with Chairperson Valdez Avila, and we had a great discussion. She's been leading the way here in terms of women's inclusivity. What I can say is in Canada, I'm happy to say that some of the policies we put in place to help empower women we have national early learning and childcare, so making sure that there is childcare integrated into our policies that will enable more women into the workforce. But one of the biggest enablers for entrepreneurship is our women entrepreneurship strategy. We recognize that women often have challenges with getting access to capital, for example. So through our strategy, we have provided women access to our Women Entrepreneurship Loan Fund. We're supporting our ecosystem that helps. So no matter where you live in Canada, you're going to have a support system to help you with that. And then how that relates to building relations here in the Philippines is enabling, like Maninder Sidhu said, those trade trips that will allow the connections and deepen the partnerships between the two. So we're doing on our side in preparing women entrepreneurs, giving them the opportunity to maximize that. But building the bridge, I think, is the most important piece to the work that I'm doing. And I'm currently working on the small and medium-sized enterprise export readiness program. We're readying the ground in Canada so that once this free trade agreement comes into play with the Philippines or with the ASEAN region, our entrepreneurs will be ready to have a plan, ready to scale, and then ready to invest. So we're trying to prepare the ground right now for that type of work.
I think one of the suggestions actually was to have some kind of a website where people could connect with both the entrepreneurs in Canada and the entrepreneurs in the Philippines can find opportunities for matching, which might be something to think about.
That's a great idea.
Minister Sidhu, critical minerals have moved to the center of Canada-Philippines conversation, among many other topics. Okay? How does Canada see the opportunities in these areas, and what does Canada actually bring that other partners don't? Because I know you've got great mining companies in Canada.
Yeah, no, absolutely. First of all, I want to say thank you to the Philippines for coming to the PDAC Mining Conference, which is the world's largest mining conference, happens in Toronto. This year was the first time that the Philippines had a country pavilion, and so that speaks to the partnership that Canada and the Philippines is building. But when you look at critical minerals right now, you're seeing certain supply chains being weaponized, and so Canada, again, presents an opportunity to work with a reliable partner. But you know, when you talk about Canada's excellence in mining, we do it sustainably. We do it with respect with the environment. We do it with respect to Indigenous communities, and so that's what Canada can offer to the world. You know, last year at the G7, the Prime Minister Carney, brought forward the Critical Minerals Alliance to work with countries around the world, like-minded countries, to make sure that we have a steady supply of minerals, working on offtake agreements, price floors. And so that's important for our industries as we focus on advanced manufacturing. you need critical minerals. And so Canada has the know-how, the capacity to help countries like the Philippines build up that. And so when I think about the Philippines, the mineral resources here in the Philippines are the 5th largest in the world. And so that's incredible abundance of minerals. And so we can step up as Canadians with utilizing our technology, our financing capabilities to get those minerals out of the ground. As you know, here in the Philippines, Canadian investors are the largest investors in the mining sector. And so there's already a deep history there, and I believe that there's room to grow that.
I think one of the areas where the Philippines is looking at is downstream processing of minerals, because right now we're basically exporting ore elsewhere, and perhaps that's technology that Canada can bring in and invest along with the local partners.
Absolutely, and there's a real appetite to do that. And so, I think having those engagements between Canada and the Philippines being there at the PDAC conference was very important. It's a signal that you sent, but it's also the technology that we're developing. Canada will soon be launching a $2 billion critical minerals fund. Government will be taking action investing in mining projects. We're also speeding up mining projects back home. We just launched our major projects office, which means that mining projects will be approved within 2 years, working with provinces, territories, indigenous communities across the country. And so you're going to see more of that, but of course we welcome Canadian investments coming into the Philippines. In fact, investments are going up, as I mentioned in my speech. Last year was $1.7 billion, an increase of 44% in 1 year alone. And so more of that, more momentum, and this is exactly why we signaled that we're investing $2 million in the Luzon Economic Partnership Corridor to send another signal to our companies back home that we're ready to do more with the Philippines.
I was actually going to ask you about the Luzon Economic Corridor, but you forestalled us by saying you just signed. So thank you very much for joining that partnership. Just an additional question. You also mentioned about that we have a nuclear agreement, I believe. Given the Philippines' current energy emergency and in renewed conversation around nuclear, and with all these data centers going up in the Luzon Economic Corridor, everyone's asking what's going to power them up. How does Canada see its role?
Look, I think everywhere you look across the Indo-Pacific, you're seeing data centers pop up. And the conversation that I'm having in my trips in the region and further out is about Canada's capacity to produce more energy, to supply more energy to the region. We are an energy superpower, but we also have a big advantage that we don't have any choke points in the supply chains when you go from the west coast of Canada to the Indo-Pacific region. And so you're seeing the choke points through the Strait of Hormuz, but we don't have that in Canada. We have a reliable route where we can ship our LNG out. And so like I said in my speech, we have about 6 LNG projects in various phases of development, and we welcome investments in there, especially at a time when you're seeing so much instability around energy. But we also know we need to focus on renewable energy, renewable sources of energy. And I know here President Marcos has publicly mentioned that he wants to get to, I think, increase capacity by 30% in the renewable energy industry by 2035. And that's where nuclear comes in. That's where can-do technology comes in. That's where our uranium supply comes in. That's where companies like AtkinsRéalis come in, because the technology has advanced so much that safety is no longer a consideration. I mean, I know there were some objections around safety hazards and whatnot, but nuclear technology has come so far that even in Canada, we're investing. We're actually looking at investing the largest nuclear site in the world. We have the first SMR commercialized unit that will be going up in the G7. It's a GE Hitachi project where our government invested $2 billion. And so we're very bullish on renewable energies, especially nuclear. And I know we have a lot to offer, especially here in the Philippines. So I know those conversations will continue, but I know they're also deepened along with the ambassador's support and, of course, what Wayne Farmer's doing through the ASEAN Business Council. So this is important to make sure that we're able to facilitate those conversations, because without renewable sources, those data centers may not be viable.
Actually, one of the problems, I think, in the Philippines, which perhaps can be discussed at the government levels, there's no governing regulations for nuclear right now in the Philippines. So I guess that's another area where we can look to Canada for
on the regulatory
guidance.
framework, we're happy to assist. We've been assisting for some time now, and we're happy to continue that conversation, because it is important that you bring communities on board to explain what the safety precautions are. Why do we need nuclear over others? But right now, the Strait of Hormuz is really pushing countries to think outside the box. I was just in South Korea, where they scale back some of that manufacturing because of the energy crisis, and they're looking to start up their nuclear reactors again, utilizing Canadian technology. And so Canada's really stepping up with conventional energy, but also clean energy.
Thank you. Minister Valdez, Canada, as you mentioned earlier, is home to nearly 1 million Canadians of Filipino descent. And you had mentioned earlier how the people-to-people connections can help, but how this else can does Canada leverage this community to strengthen the trade and investment relationships? And what more, I know on the Philippine side, what can we do to deepen those people-to-people ties?
Well, just having these conversations, I think, are really important. So I really thank you for this opportunity to share the good things that we are working on. Minister Sidhu spent a lot of time talking about the opportunity in terms of energy, et cetera. But I really want to talk about where we stand in terms of a country. Canada is at a very strong economic position. We have the lowest net to jet debt GDP ratio in the G7. We also have had the second largest direct foreign investment in the G7. We're in a very strong position. This is the time, and the reason why I keep talking about the 1 million Filipinos strong is because those relationships that we have with families, with businesses, those ties is what is going to be our hugest opportunity. Because a lot of Minister Sidhu mentioned the Philippine Chamber of Commerce. We've never had that, but now that that's established, while he secures this agreement and he focuses on it, my role is to help get the word out to all the Filipino entrepreneurs and all the entrepreneurs to be able to take advantage of the free trade agreement. And I think by preparing them, helping them create a plan, helping them have access to the Trade Commissioner office, it's really you're going to see a catalyzing momentum as we move forward, and it'll just continue to strengthen our economic ties and, of course, create more opportunity on both sides of the border.
99% of our businesses, by the way, are SMEs, as you
Same
probably
in
know.
Canada, yeah.
Oh, it's also the same, okay. So last question from me, okay. Many of our members are squeezed between tariff volatility and cost pressure from competing nations. They are also watching foreign investors with deep public finance pockets line up infrastructure financing and price competitive trade of goods and services. What's Canada's pitch to MBC members in this regard?
I think you need those investments to come in. If you look at infrastructure investments, and we're doing that in Canada. If I want to expand by $300 billion of non-U.S. exports, we need to invest in our ports. We need to invest in our airport cargo handling capacity. And so you need the large-scale investors as well at the same time to build up your port capacity, to build up your shipping capacity, so then that can help small businesses. Because as you can imagine, if you squeeze capacity and you don't have enough supply and there's too much demand, the shipping rates will skyrocket. And so you need to be able to support that infrastructure investment from coming in, to come in, but also to make sure that there's more options for SMEs to ship their goods out. So as you focus on FTA, free trade agreements, you need to create the conditions of shipping. You need to create the conditions that small businesses can access those logistic supply lines. And so I would say that is something that's very important. That's where Canada can add a perspective. But also where the complementary services. I mean, I would say we can work together as your tourism sector grows. Aerospace is big in Canada. As you know, Bombardier has been here, Bell Helicopters, which is part of the president's fleet. If you look at de Havilland, the amphibious planes that can land on water, we have a lot to offer there. What can we learn from the Philippines? I would say around apparel, around agriculture. There's so many things that we can learn from each other. There's a lot of complementary services, and this is why the negotiation is going as smoothly as it is, because we're not competing economies. If you look at the two-way trade and you look at the numbers and you look at what's going back and forth, we actually don't compete. We have a lot to grow together on, and so I can sign all the free trade agreements as I want, but I need SMEs to use them. And that's where Minister Valdez and her work comes in, is how do we make sure that once FTAs are signed that they're marketed, that they're accessible. I spent 13 years as a custom broker. My job was to break down those FTAs for businesses to utilize them, use preferential duty treatments. And so right now, 75% of Canadian goods exported to the Philippines have tariffs. And so the goal is to reduce those tariffs so more Canadian goods have access to this market, but the same way the other way. If you look at just apparel alone or clothing, our duty rate on clothing is 18%, as high as 18%. So that is prohibitive. And if you have an FTA with a country, as you can imagine, 18% is the difference between getting a sale and not getting a sale for a small business. And so that's what FTAs can really do.
The only thing I'll add is Minister Sidhu talked about the conditions. When you invest in Canada, one of the things that the Prime Minister did right when we came into government is he brought down the federal trade barriers that existed between all the provinces and territories, so that we as a country would function and act more like one country. And I think this is our strength, because we've reduced some of the barriers that existed for entrepreneurs, and that way, as investors come in, the conditions are there. Minister Sidhu talked about tourism. Think about a million of our Kababayans who live in Canada. They're constantly coming back and forth between the Philippines and Canada, constantly. From a tourism perspective, this helps both sides: restaurants, tourism operators, hoteliers. This is huge. And then now with the access of Air Canada, and I'm sure more trips between our two countries, like, you can see the benefit there for sure.
Yeah. Thank you, ministers, for that really enriching discussion. I think a lot of people don't realize what a great nation Canada really is, and how good it is at just so many things: mining, agriculture. Even one of the first operating systems used for business, I think, was developed at the University of Waterloo, which was really used by a lot of businesses here in the Philippines. So IT, graphics, just so many things, and it would be great if those ties can be strengthened further, and that we can learn more also from you.
I would say also in the financial services is a sector that you know much about. I think that's important to mention here. I mean, if you look at the services sector and where trade is going between the Philippines and Canada, last year alone it increased by 20%, which is pretty big. It's over $3 billion, and I'm seeing a lot of growth potential there in the financial services sector as well.
Yeah, how could I forget that? I used to run what's, by the way, the largest insurance company in the country. It's Canadian. So, and has been here since 1895, older than the Republic of the Philippines. Okay, so we now move to a few questions from the audience. Anybody that has questions for our ministers?
Yeah, thank you, Riza. I think most of this has been discussed already, like ministers.
Sorry, please introduce yourself and then ask your
I'm John
question.
Palafox. I'm an architect, urban planner. I've also done projects in 40 countries. I'm now focused in our country. Anyway, ministers, many of us are watching the Canada-Philippines FTA negotiations very closely. And beyond tariff lines, what concrete commitments will it deliver that businesses can plan around? You mentioned some of them already. If I may share, even education. My son just came back with a master's degree in island development planning in Prince Edward Island University. And we have 7,000 islands, and we lack the seamless connectivity, for instance. Cost of logistics in our country is 20%. So I'm going beyond the question, but I'm thinking of so many things Canada and the Philippines can do together. Yeah. What other commitment, aside from Luzon Economic Corridor? I hope we can go to Mindanao and the Visayas as well. And responsible mining, energy, etc. But I just thought about sharing the good education you can get from Canada. Thank you.
Yeah, first of all, I love the barong. And congratulations to your son. You said he completed his degree. Yeah, well, touching on education, I mean, our education system is world-renowned. We have so many international students who come to Canada for a strong education, and not even just that, a strong healthcare system. We have a free healthcare system in Canada. So again, we just have a place where families love to grow, call home, and it's really great for, again, businesses. But I think in terms of our discussion today, we've touched very heavily on energy, on nuclear. I touched on agriculture, but really artificial intelligence, it's endless. It really is endless, and the opportunities are there. But the excitement around the free trade agreement is making sure that I do a better job of making sure our entrepreneurs back home have the opportunities to have bridges and conversations. I myself was an entrepreneur before I came into politics, and one of the challenges I had as an entrepreneur, if you're wondering, I was a baker. I reached out because I was trying to import, Philippine ingredients like mango flour to incorporate into my baked goods, and then eventually turn it around and then export my products back. So I was trying to have those conversations, but a lot of barriers existed in terms of being able to accomplish that. And so my hopes are with this free trade agreement is that entrepreneurs like myself who really want the option and the choice to have more of that. And to be able to have that done seamlessly in a cost-effective manner. You know, the more that you can do that, the more that our businesses on both sides can benefit.
And speaking of food and building on that, Minister Valdez mentioned, you know, all of our FTAs have phytosanitary standards built into them. And so that will send a clear signal, especially in the agriculture industry. But at the end of the day, I think FTAs, what free trade agreements, what they represent is certainty for businesses. You're able to go, you're able to look up the duty rates, you know that there's a process in place, and so it's really helping to facilitate more trade. And so you're seeing that across the board whenever Canada signs a free trade agreement. Usually within the span of 6 to 8 years, trade doubles with any particular country. And that's because businesses get behind that, and you're giving businesses that stability with the free trade agreement. And so the free trade agreement, yes, we have a goods and services chapter that talks about duties, but at the end of the day, it's about certainty and that signal that it sends to the business community that these two countries want to do more together.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for the sharing that you did, Minister Sidhu and Minister Valdez, and of course, Riza. Just for a personal connection first with Canada, well, I have a brother-in-law who's been living in Canada for 21 years. And I think during COVID, 3 or 4 of my neighbors moved to Canada, leaving us behind in the Philippines. And
you're always welcome.
And and I did go to Calgary once to negotiate an LNG transaction, but it didn't happen because maybe the Iran crisis didn't happen too soon. Had it happened before, then maybe the LNG transaction could have pushed through. Anyway, I have 2 questions, very, very short questions. The first is something you can take seriously or in jest. I don't know if I think most of you were here in the Philippines yesterday and witnessed what happened yesterday. So the first question is, do you have a fast-track approach to Canadian citizenship and migration? Because I would like to apply. But second, seriously, if there's no answer to that first question, actually I think most of us here in the room would like to improve the mutual trade between Canada and the Philippines, particularly in agriculture. I, for one, we produce coconut sugar in Mindanao. We already supply to Japan, and we supply to Starbucks. We're now working on trying to supply to Canada. But I think on a more high technology basis, we would like to see partnerships in your precision agriculture, nuclear technology, and probably water and waste to energy technology, supply chain systems. And the question is, in your mind, what would be the top choice or priority that we should be working on in terms of these kinds of opportunities?
Well, thank you for the question. You know, when you talk about the top priorities, you mentioned a lot of them in your question to us. When you talk about clean technology, of course, that's very important. But even in the agriculture space, Canada has a lot to offer in terms of agriculture technology. Better sustainable practices, how to farm with less water usage, less fertilizer usage. That's what we excel on. If you come to Canada, Manitoba, Saskatchewan has a lot of good agriculture technology there to support you to get more yields out of your farms. I think that's very important to mention, but also fertilizer. We're known for, you know, some of the best potash in the world to help you grow your food here. And so that's also what we talked about today with Secretary Roque and Secretary Go, was what more can we do together for food security? How can we learn from each other in better farming, better sustainable practices with farming and agriculture? And so you've mentioned some of the key ones, but of course, renewable energies, as you know, is very important to this government here. It's very important to our government. We're making that R&D investment in Canada so countries around the world can benefit from our research.
What I'll talk about in terms of agriculture is just how, like, we've had an opportunity of visiting multiple agriculture businesses across Canada. Again, world-renowned technology. In Canada, it's way too cold. In the Philippines, it's way too hot. So we have opposite problems, but the beauty with some of our greenhouse technology is it allows us to have very controlled conditions. And you can grow up as opposed to out. And there's just some really great things that we're happy to share with you in terms of development. We talked about already the advancement in technology, but in every respect that you brought up, I also brought up the example of the woman entrepreneur who came here. She has the technology you're looking for. So again, it's really that exchange. As business entrepreneurs, you have a bucket list, I would say, of things you need, and then we comparably in Canada have that matching type of solution to offer you. So I think that's the type of exchange that we certainly need to have. But having a free trade agreement will certainly help enable those conversations to happen quicker.
Thank you. I forgot, my name is JJ Soriano, and my main business is really promoting Philippine and international investments and trade. So if any way we can help, we'd be happy to. Thank
By
you.
the way, JJ,
Yes.
the first requirement for applying for Canadian citizenships, good moral character.
Good, good. So none of the 24 or none of the 13. Okay, thank
Okay,
you.
you have another question? Peter, yeah.
Thank you so much for greeting the Makati Business Club. Super excited about your participation in the Luzon Economic Corridor and a lot of your priority areas like nuclear, agriculture, critical minerals are certainly the same as our priorities as well. So I'm a trustee of Makati Business Club. I'm an independent director of Aboitiz Equity Ventures. And I was curious, how do we help? And I was wondering if you could share a bit more specifics on the investments that you've made, how they were originated, how they came about, so that we can educate our members as well on how they might best position themselves to also co-invest with you in the priority areas and bring it to life in the next 12 to 24 months. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I think the Makati Business Club, you've got a big group of members, 700 members, and so I think the first thing would be to identify areas of opportunity in Canada. Once you've identified that, then our trade commissioners can then help you, make sure you're connected with the right people. But if I was in your shoes, I would probably look at a trade delegation to Canada. Identify what sectors you want to operate in, and then let us know so we can make sure the matchmaking is done, so you can then benefit from these important agreements. And so that would probably be step one, is to really introduce yourself to the market, get familiar with the market, and then hopefully eventually invest in a market. And so in Canada, a lot of our investments that came inbound was in mining, was in energy, was in infrastructure, because we're really focused on building up those projects. We call them major projects. So we have 15 identified projects as part of our major projects list. 5 of the 15 are just in mining alone. And so if you have within your members individuals that are focused on mining, I would ask them to look at that, because we do have proponents in the mining sector that are looking for investments in many of the mining projects that we have in Canada. So that's kind of identify what sectors and then start from there. That's just in mining alone, but there's other areas as we build up our infrastructure around logistics. That's another thing. We're building up our port infrastructure at the Port of Montreal. We're actually expanding that. The Prime Minister announced that last month. On the West Coast, we're building up the Roberts Bank terminal eventually to build up capacity on the West Coast. But part of that, the port system, is the inland terminals, the warehousing. And so that's going to require investments as well. And so I would say, come visit Canada so we can put you in touch with those proponents and have those conversations of what's required and what's needed.
Thank you.
I'm just going to add a couple things as Maninder was talking. So a lot of investment has been brought in also in our automotive industry and our self-defense industry, because we have amazing technology with regards to developing planes. A lot of the development we make is very green, very sustainable, and those are the solutions that are often, if you think about a plane flying in the sky, you want to make sure that plane is lighter. So our planes are developed in a way that it's physically lighter and therefore more sustainable. And yeah, I mean, like, there's just so much opportunity, I think, like, in every, what I will say about Canada is it's a very You have our urban centers, but in different parts of the country, it's northern and very rural, where we have mining, etc. The reason why I think it's important to have a trade trip is you really have to come on the ground and see what we have to offer, because different parts of the country, whether it's in Alberta or Saskatchewan, are very different than like a Greater Toronto region, like an urban center like Vancouver and Toronto. But coming there, seeing the technology, seeing the solutions, I think the best way to do it is if you come and see it for yourself.
And if I can add to that really quickly, educational partnerships. If you look at your members and you look at the nuclear capacity in this country, you look at the capacity around mining, sustainable mining practices. In other countries that I visit, there's a lot of partnerships being signed in the educational space with local colleges, partnering up with Canadian institutions to bring that expertise here. So if your aerospace industry is growing, they would pair up with somebody in the aerospace space back in Canada, and then they would start teaching those courses. And so there's a lot of opportunity in the educational space as well within your partners. So I don't know out of the 700 members how many are represented in each sector, but again, looking at that, breaking that down, and then reaching out to us, and we can help connect you.
Thank you. We have time for one last quick question from Mr. Del Rosario.
Thank you. I'm Miguel Del Rosario. I am chairman of the Animation Council of the Philippines, which is part of the BPO industry in the Philippines. So talking about SMEs, we do have a co-production agreement between Canada and the Philippines. And that's something that needs, as of now, it's quite hollow. In other words, we need to put some substance into it. So if I may just suggest, maybe that's something that we could look into and put more substance into it, just so that the two countries could work together, because the Philippines is, as you know, Mr. Valdez, very rich as far as creativity, cultural aspects are concerned. So there's something to be had over there. So it's maybe something that we could look into it more intensively. Thank you very much.
I'm happy to take that back to the Minister of Heritage, who would be in charge of that. Mark Miller would be in charge of that, so we're happy to take that back. Thank you.
Maybe I'll share a positive story of our Canadian investments into the Philippines through the programs like Catalyst. The last time I was here, I visited Magallanes, and through Catalyst, our Canadian government has invested in Catalyst. And what they did for a small city in Magallanes is it empowered women entrepreneurs to take what's in their backyards, fruits, coconut, mangoes, berries, and we gave them the know-how to transform those very simple things in their backyard and turn it into a product, which was then able to be marketable. And the money that those women entrepreneurs were able to generate not only helped food insecurity in their local communities, it helped provide them with, finances to be able to help their own communities. So a lot of our investments go such a long way here in the Philippines, and I just want to share some of those positive stories. And when I visited there, the women entrepreneurs were so happy to share with me their cool products. So what I'm picturing one day is being able to have those amazing women-owned businesses and their products come and be sold in our country. That would be amazing.
Amazing. So that's a wrap on our open discussion. Thank you very much, Ministers, for your really valuable perspectives. I'll turn you over now to Mitch.
Thank you very much, Honourable Sidhu and Honourable Valdez, for taking the time in sharing your insights with us today. And thank you, Riza, for facilitating this insightful discussion as well. Please remain on stage. We'll be having a group photo opportunity. Our ushers will direct you there. Okay, we'll take a few photos. After some photos, I will be inviting Ambassador David Hartman and the rest of the MBC Board of Trustees, Cosette, Canilao, Peter Maquera, Victor Paterno, as well as the Embassy of Canada's Senior Trade Commissioner, Janine Fiddler, to join them on stage for another photo opportunity. I would like to ask the usher to kindly remove the name tags, if there are any. Okay. Thank you, everyone. You may now return to your seats.
Okay. Let's go, Mitch.
Okay, thank you very much. To formally conclude our program, I would like to invite Cosette Canilao.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I was meaning to ask Minister Valdez earlier. Aside from being a trustee of MBC, I also lead Aboitiz Infra Capital, and we manage the Mactan Cebu International Airport, as well as Bohol. Sorry. Okay, I think we need to settle that a little bit. Okay, we can start. Yeah, I was saying that Minister Valdez, aside from being a trustee of Makati Business Club, I also had Aboitiz Infra Capital. We manage 3 airports here in the Philippines, in Mactan, Cebu, in Bohol, and Laguindingan, which is the gateway to northern Mindanao. Now, with 1 million Filipinos at least in Canada, I think we need to look into how we can promote Philippines more so that we have more tourists coming from Canada. I think in 2024, we had around 250,000 visitors from Canada, and we're hoping to improve that. So, on behalf of the Makati Business Club, I express my deep gratitude to Ambassador Hartman and the Embassy of Canada for your partnership with MBC for today's special session of our Foreign Leader Series. We first collaborated with the Embassy in December 2024 during the Team Canada Trade Mission visit, Canada's largest trade mission to the Philippines and Indonesia. MBC partnered with the Business Council of Canada to host a networking reception for Canadian and Philippine companies, and we're honored to sustain this engagement with today's event. This is the first time that we have featured 2 ministers in the same session since we launched the Foreign Leaders Series in 2023, and we are grateful to be entrusted with this meaningful engagement. To those who are unfamiliar, MBC represents 400, but Minister Sidhu said 700, of the country's leading enterprises. Among our membership are leading Canadian companies such as Sun Life, Colliers, TELUS, Royal Bank of Canada, and Tim Hortons. In fact, we previously hosted Sun Life Global CEO Kevin Strain as a keynote speaker in our Global Series in 2023. In turn, Philippine crowd favorites like Goldilocks, Potato Corner, and of course, MBC member Jollibee have had tremendous success in Canada with the presence in British Columbia, Alberta, and Ontario, to name a few. Suffice it to say, both our countries share deep business ties which are built on mutual trust, growing investments, and shared commitment to creating opportunities that benefit both our economies and our people. A commitment that is reflected by Ministers Sidhu and Valdez's visit to the Philippines, highlighting the growing importance of Canada-Philippines relations. According to the PSA, Philippine Statistics Authority, Canada was the Philippines' 16th largest trading partner last year, with our total trade valued at $2.1 billion in favor of the Philippines. I am confident that these ties will be further strengthened by the ongoing negotiations for the Philippine-Canada and ASEAN-Canada free trade agreements, especially with the Philippines' chairship of ASEAN this year. Among other collaborations in agriculture, defense, and maritime security, renewable energy, critical minerals, and digitalization, and hopefully tourism, Minister. As we navigate a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous global landscape, each issue with its own unique complexities, we look to Canada for a steadfast partnership to transform these global challenges into opportunities for shared prosperity and growth. Ministers, thank you again for making the trip all the way here. I hope that the rest of your trip will be memorable for both of you. Thank you. And good afternoon.
Thank you to our trustee, Cosette Canilao. That concludes the special session of our Foreign Leaders Series with the Minister of International Trade, Honourable Maninder Sidhu, and Minister for Women and Gender Equality, and Secretary for State for Small Businesses and Tourism, Honourable Rechie Valdez. Please don't forget to share your comments and feedback on today's event by scanning the QR code displayed on the screen or placed on your tables. Stay up to date on MBC events, activities, and advocacies by following us on our social media pages flashed on the screen. Thank you for joining us today and keep safe.